The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, June 3rd, St. John the Great Sinner. Juan Grande was born in the small Andalusian town of Carmona in 1546. When the young man was 15 years old, he lost his father and went to live with a relative who had a clothing store in Seville. Soon after, the boy set up a similar business on his own in Carmona and began to prosper. However, the things of this world held no attraction for John, and upon reaching the age of 22, he distributed all his goods among the poor and retired to live in a hermitage near the town of Marchena. In spite of the fact that since his childhood he had observed an irreproachable conduct, he considered himself as the most vile and despicable of men. Due in part to this feeling and to the fear that others would consider him as a hypocrite, he transformed his surname into a nickname, and everywhere he presented himself, no longer as Juan Grande, but as the Great Sinner. With the nickname of John the Sinner, he is venerated to this day in Andalusia. One day he found two vagabonds who were sick and lying by the roadside. Full of compassion, he led the homeless to his hut, took care of them, and went out to beg for alms to feed them. Soon other similar cases arose, and it seemed to John that God was calling him to serve him in providing succor and affectionate solicitude to the afflicted and helpless. For 3 years he lived and worked in terrible conditions among the dregs of humanity, to help the prisoners, to feed them with alms that he went out to beg from door to door, and to soften the hearts of hardened criminals with sweet words of consolation. Armed with infinite patience, he endured scorn, insults, ingratitude, and even beatings. Later he served in the hospitals, and there he had to suffer persecution from the directors, employees, and nurses who saw in the devotion with which John cared for the sick a silent reproach to their own negligence and hardness of heart. On the other hand, there were others who observed John and were impressed by his abnegation, so much so that a wealthy couple of the city founded a hospital, which they left in the hands of the sinner. Immediately the house was filled with patients, and many young people also came, moved by John's example and eager to serve. In order that his work would not die with him, he affiliated his hospital to the group under the care of the Hospitaller Order, whose founder, St. John of God, had died in Seville when John the Sinner was a boy of 4 years old. He too joined the order. Although his main concern was the sick, he gave his help and affection to all the afflicted. He gathered around him abandoned wives and provided them with food for their bodies and good advice for the guidance of their souls. He also used to collect money to provide a dowry for marriageable girls of poor condition. He still had time left for frequent visits to the prisoners, whom he never forgot. Following the capture of Cádiz by the English, 300 fugitive Spanish soldiers arrived in Jerez. The Blessed took charge of all of them, and by a true miracle, as the soldiers themselves admitted in amazement, he distributed food and clothing among them all, without missing a single one. The physical activity of his existence did not prevent him from reaching the high levels of the spirit. He often fell into raptures, and sometimes ecstasies surprised him while he was performing his works of mercy. In such cases, when he regained consciousness, he would find himself surrounded by curious passers-by who, taking him for a madman or a drunkard, would insult or mock him. But John would only respond with a humble plea for forgiveness for his oddities and continue on his way, crestfallen. Prophetic gifts were also attributed to him, and it is said that he foretold the destruction of the Spanish Invincible Armada. John the Sinner died in 1600 at the age of 54 due to the plague he contracted while caring for the victims of a terrible epidemic that struck Jerez. He was beatified in 1853.